Holy shit, do I have a crazy match to show you guys. First of all, do not worry, the only April Fool's joke here is that you guys are actually going to expect me to post videos again after this, which probably isn't going to happen, but this video is serious. The topic of this video is going to be the limits of FOB spam, and before I really get into it, I actually want to clarify what I mean by FOB spam, since I have a feeling some people who don't normally watch my channel are going to see this video. So when a lot of people hear me talk about FOB spam, they assume, there's some relevant objectives here, and here, and my idea is just to bury the map with as many FOBs in decent locations as possible to give my team the most map control possible. And that is kind of part of the strategy, but that does have its limits, obviously, and you really have to prioritize them. When I am talking about FOB spam, oftentimes what I really mean is my general thought process that there is always a FOB that can be built to end any fight. So let's say this is an enemy flag, and your team is, let me grab a couple colors here actually. Your team is pushing off of a friendly FOB from this direction, and the enemy is pushing back off of their flag, which also has a FOB. This is a firefight, and there's a lot of ways that various SLs will go about trying to improve this or trying to put the odds in their favor with this firefight. Some of them will try to flank, some of them will try to place a close rally, some of them will go for a very wide flank on foot with a bunch of people and place a rally, or just walk the people in. Everybody has a different way of approaching this situation to try to capture the flag. I'd argue that most pub SLs will just keep beating their head against a wall until something changes, which it never will. My thought process here is almost always to build a FOB that takes care of the enemy contact. Why a FOB? Because I want a spawn that is more permanent than a rally, that's not going to get accidentally squashed like a rally, and I want a spawn that any number of people can shift to if it's needed. Plus, just the general permanence of a FOB then works defensively on this flag. So what I'm going to do typically is I'm going to go wide in a truck with me and one other person, so I'm not taking anybody else out of the fight who's then going to start losing this fight because I flanked with 9 people and I'm out of it. I'm just going to take my Logi all the way around, bring it over here, and place a close FOB to the west that is not typically going to be detected because most blueberries do not have the situational awareness, and I'm quite aware of how far my vehicle noise will travel and exactly where I can sneak in with the terrain because of my map knowledge. And then I'm going to push it from here and attempt to proxy that. Now people will say that this is a risk and I should put a rally instead because of the ticket sink, but in the end it represents a time sink as well. If the enemy actually pushes back and starts to take this down, that's typically going to be several people who had to overwhelm the people I brought plus the people who were spawning, and who are going to have to take care of this radio, and that in turn might make this fight go better. It's a ticket costing strategy, but it will usually result in a favorable position on a flag. Now that's an oversimplification. Sometimes the enemy will have multiple FOBs, sometimes it gets really complicated, sometimes the enemy is good, but that's generally what I mean by FOB spam, and that's my general strategy in a vast majority of pub servers, because typically pubs just aren't good enough to counter it. Even when I'm playing on good servers, what typically makes a server good is that several clans will play on it, and I might have to worry about 2 full clan squads on the enemy team, and they might be more situationally aware. But most of these clans are just going to be players with good micro skills who have clustered together and developed bonds, and they're still going to be following the same pub ideology of running into contact like this. They're just going to be outshooting my team and actually getting closer to the FOB. In this instance, FOB spam works pretty much just as well, because now, as that FOB's being lost and the enemy team is overextended, I can get onto theirs, and they didn't actually have anyone defending it. There are obviously exceptions, and there are very good clans out there who will be situationally aware and will actually counter it, but it's not that common to come across in the wild when playing pub squads, or pub servers. But as always, there are exceptions to this rule, and the exception we're talking about today is the entire server tactical trigonometry. The server is highly unique in that it really cultivates an experienced player base. Pretty much all of the regular TTs are attempting to become better players at all times, which is something you really don't see in other clans. The general culture of the server is good squad gameplay, and the SLs aren't afraid to talk to each other, to call out bad plays, to try to improve, and the teams are usually fairly well balanced because there's such a fundamental culture of teamwork that even the pubs on the server are typically above average players and are making smart plays. This is pretty much unheard of on most other servers where it's just a cluster of regulars who are whatever and then a couple of experienced clans. And this really changes the way you have to approach the server. When I first joined, I realized that, first of all, a lot of the players that I respected had transferred over to the server and were playing on it full time, and a lot of them were taking kind of an anti-fob stance, which I found surprising since it was kind of accepted that fob meta was just the way to play pub squad at the time. And I honestly attributed it to the wrong things. I thought it was either a case of comp players coming to pub and trying to push comp strats, even though there were other better alternatives in pubs that they could be doing, or people who were just opposed to that meta in general, trying to break free of it and then trying to essentially broadcast their accomplishments and say, look, we're doing just fine with rallies, we can manage without it, even if it's not necessarily the optimal play. And I kind of ignored them, to be honest, and tried my usual stuff. But I very quickly figured out that the reason why this server was kind of anti-fob spam wasn't idealist or illogical, and it wasn't necessarily something they were trying to promote as a culture. It was out of pure fucking necessity, because when you place a fob on this server, it's on a timer. And I don't mean any fob that's discovered is on a timer like I normally say. I mean the moment you place that fob, the enemy most likely knows about it and are actively working in smart and efficient ways to remove that fob from the map. Similarly, the usual things that I gain from fob spamming, which is the ability to outmaneuver and outpace enemies, aren't necessarily applying when the enemy is just as aware of the general game flow and is easily capable of making it to their defense objectives at the same time that I make it to them when I'm trying to leapfrog during an opportune moment, or they're just as capable of actually looking the opposite direction of a firefight and a flag and countering a full logi push if I'm making it in a precarious fashion. This means that games on TT tend to follow a fairly standard trend where they will be quite defensive, and they will really come down to microplay and ticket conservation. You can't get these huge objective swings that you aim for on other servers, and if you do something like I do, where you go and throw a bunch of ticket-heavy assets at flags in order to attempt to capture them in quick succession, and you fail, you just really messed it up for the rest of your team, who's now trying to play a more ticket-conserved game as they deal with the fact that they have plus 20 for the mid or minus 20 for the mid, and are really just focusing on microgame, because it's not likely that they're going to be able to make easy captures and get tons of tickets in flag swings. This comes back to what I talked about with the law of symmetry, where when every person on the entire team for both teams is playing active objectives, the law of averages tends to play out, and it's highly unlikely that one team will get the advantage on both objectives at the same time and hold them long enough to get a full offense flag capture while also maintaining their entire defense, especially when fobs go down and people start shifting to the other relevant objective, which is the reason why double neutrals in squad are so common and are particularly common on this server. So with all that said, and all these lessons I've learned from playing TT, you would expect this match to play quite differently than most of my normal matches, right? You'd expect me to maybe focus more on micro, to maybe be much more limited with my fob placement, and to really try to conserve tickets, possibly even go full defensive on a midpoint or a defense objective or something like that. That's what you'd expect anyway, and actually the reason why I'm showing this match is because there were some outlying circumstances that led up to this. The previous match was a roll. We completely decimated the enemy team. And honestly, I didn't feel like our team was all that fantastic either. It just kind of happened. This didn't feel to me like prime TT hours. This kind of felt like, just your average pub server, at least in the previous match. And to add to that, I don't know this layer. This is my second time ever playing Harju, and it's my first time playing a RAAS layer. And this is a quite complicated RAAS layer, so I'm not necessarily feeling comfortable right now. I think I jokingly said to Sniffles, alright, you're in charge in the beginning, tell me where to go or whatever. Because I'm not necessarily sure how I even want to play this in the first place. And if you want to get a good, solid microplay defensive strategy, you kinda have to know the terrain. Now, as you can see, just from a quick glance at squad lanes, this is a bit of a complicated layer. Seemingly there's 3 lanes, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and 2 of them are 8 flags, and one of them appears to be a 6 flag, so you can see why this one would get a bit confusing. Fortunately for us, our first flag clarifies lane. Unfortunately for us, this is quite hard to digest coming to a map from the first time about exactly how I want to play this. So it's an 8 flag, so we only really need flag 4. There's no actual midpoint, so we could go defensive there. But in the beginning of this match, I'm kind of thinking we may as well just get good control over this entire region here, because it looks like it could be controlled with a simple 3 fobs. Plus, if their side doesn't clarify lane, which it might not, I can't be sure, we might actually have quite an advantage in this entire area. So my thought process here is maybe we can get away with fob spam because of how terrible the team was last match, and maybe in the process we can get an extra flag here and get a ticket advantage over the enemy. I believe if we were to capture flag 5 in an 8 flag, it would be removing the 20 tickets that they would need to get equal with us and adding another 20 for a neutral flag capture for a total of plus 40. And if we let them capture it first and then come in and get it, it should be the full plus 70. Now, the third and final reason that I decided to go for a fob-heavy approach to this entire match is that our staging phase isn't necessarily great. We do have a lot of people going towards the mids, but one of them is Commander, who ends up in a solo Logi. I don't know how or why, he might have had somebody disconnect, but he can't get his fob up early, and he doesn't really have anyone supporting him. Another one is us, and we are a small squad, which I do have locked, and I considered unlocking, but there really weren't any other pubs who could join it anyway. There was a ton of squads created. And ultimately, we're going to be the only ones on the mid, and the one squad that I know is very capable, which is Squad 7, is going for a bit of a meme run by US main. I don't really know what their goal is. They might be trying to block a back cap or whatever, but either way, they're not going to be on the mid early. So I'm feeling like we're a little outmanned here, and I'm hoping to make up for it by having better map control through various spawns. Now, the first fob that I'm placing here, we were actually discussing whether or not this building was open and I could place a fob inside, which is a lot more important on TT than it was on other servers, and this map isn't. So I at least get the radio slightly into cover, so hopefully it can't get airstruck, and I put the fob in the middle here where hopefully mortars aren't going to be super effective at hitting it. But ultimately, this is going to be our first fob, and we're going to go work on creating a second one. And another squad is sending someone over to command where he can get that third fob. So we should be able to get 3 fobs pretty early in the main center area where most of the stuff is going to be going down. Now, on most servers, this is basically GG for the center area. All we need to do now is react to where enemies are placing their fobs. And fortunately for us, we have an awesome helicopter pilot this round who is going to basically be spotting every single thing that the enemy team does. And this is a common trend on TT. They are very good with their heli spotting. It's one of the reasons why pretty much all fobs are immediately detected, and you should be focusing on putting them out of line of sight. Though even that won't necessarily help against a lot of helis due to the render range bugs and whatnot. However, here we are, we're going to create our other fob, and our team is going to react and push the enemies who are landing to the north. Now, those enemies landing to the north tells me that they probably also had lane clarified fairly early, because that is an important objective to them that they are landing on, one of the 2 flag 5s that we're eventually going to be pushing here with this strategy. So it is a little bit of a cause for concern, but at the very least, I'm feeling like in the traditional sense, we have more map control and more defensive capability over our potential defense points than they do with their single drop there. And ultimately, the people who took the boats went to the south, and they're already pushing that north fob anyway, so hopefully we'll have a spawn advantage going forward here. Fast forwarding a bit here again, I'd like to take a moment to explain that I kinda fucked up the audio on this recording, and my mic track is not separate from the comms, and my mic track is way too quiet, so one of the reasons why I'm talking over so much of this and explaining what's going on rather than letting the comms play like I normally do is because you can barely hear my voice. But moving forward, we have a bit of a unique situation in that the helicopter calls out that those 2 infantry marks in the center of all of our defense objectives there are actually a full squad, who probably made it off of that northern fob before it started getting surrounded. Now, our team's doing a great job on that northern fob, and they are basically taking it out, and I'm attempting to build what I am looking at as a secondary defensive fob for the flag 5 that we are most likely to capture here, whether that be Research Station or the other one further out west. Our team is doing great. They're all spawning mid, they're all taking care of issues, and they're all playing really well. And the enemy team is doing better than I expected as well by actually getting here in the first place. But it seems to me at this point that we still have quite the advantage over them. That's going to change, however, as our 4th flag pops up down to the south in the middle there. I'll try to freeze frame it if I can. And the enemy actually gets there with a full squad, and as we later find out, a HAB, presumably from the west, which was a pretty good play on their end. So we are going to have to deal with that. Now, at this point, you can kind of get the idea and the suspicion that I may have been wrong by calling both teams bad at the beginning of this match. Obviously, things are shaping out to get a little bit interesting here. Now, jumping ahead again, I'm basically just sitting on this fob we just created, looking at the map as a whole. There is some issue with that southern fob, but our friendlies do start to overwhelm it, and they actually pull a classic TT move where they remove their own radio to prevent us from getting the 20 tickets when we overwhelm them on that flag. Also, I believe I called that our flag 4 earlier. I apologize, that is our flag 3. Our flag 4 has yet to pop up. But if you look at this situation from my classic pub perspective, we're in really good shape. We just prevented them from blocking our flag 3. We have our flag 4 covered by multiple spawns so we can get there in a hurry, and we are starting to prevent them from getting to their flag 5s, and we already have that double fobbed preemptively in a defensive fashion. And where this really starts to change due to the server we're on is just the pace of things. The enemy also recognizes this and are going to be actively doing things to try to put themselves in a better position. And that's not necessarily what I'm looking out for, because in most pub games, I can look at this and think, we got the next 3 flags covered. And that's pretty much exactly what I'm doing. I'm actually coordinating with the helicopter right now in an attempt to get him to drop supply on any one of these fobs for us to grab it and start preparing for offense on the next flag in line. Skipping forward a bit here, we have the helicopter inbound to give us some supply here, and we are just looking once again at how the match is developing. Our next objective, our flag 4, our defense objective, popped up to the north there and was temporarily contested, and they killed a backcapper, but ultimately we have the spawn network where half the team just spawned to the east there, and it's going to be the easiest thing in the world for them to capture. And I'd like to take one glorious moment here to look at our 4 fobs working here, because this is basically the last time you're going to see our contributions to the team have a positive impact rather than a negative one. And we are going to take some shit from the rest of the team later, and it is rightfully deserved, but I do want to take a moment here to point out that at least in our backups, we had the world's best spawn network that you could ask for stealth capping, and it was easy as pie to take care of flags 3 and 4, even though enemy contact countered us on both of them. This is also one of the reasons why I'm generally opposed to rushing in the current meta, I guess you would say, because stealth capping really is just so easy, especially if the enemy team has a little bit of foresight and could build a couple fobs to, cover their most relevant objectives. And yeah, once again, the enemy fob that 11 is on top of now, that 11 took down onto the offense objective, was easy for them to get to, but if they had any struggle, they had an immediate fob immediately to the north where other squads could put rallies down, and all these squads that are already currently on flag 3 or 4 can immediately be hopping to flag 4. I know I don't normally talk about the benefits of having fobs in locations, but as I said, on a TT server, I kind of feel like I have to defend myself for having this much of a ticket risk on the map, so that's why I'm talking about this right now. Wow, they ran that. And right on cue, there goes our first fob loss. They managed to get the radio with that, or they have infantry immediately ready to get the radio because we're not able to save it. Even though I've already picked up supplies and I'm thinking about driving back real quick to build it up, the radio is going to go down before we're able to get that. Now, it's interesting how my perspective has changed from this server, because once upon a time I would look at that as a positive. Oh, they used their airstrike and they killed one of our 4 relevant habs right now. We should be still in perfectly good shape. We'll eat that ticket cost and then we'll go roll them back to their main. But on TT, the culture is generally to have a centralized fob and external rallies, and in that kind of a situation, we would have had people right there immediately able to save this radio rather than having it a bit out in the open where it's going to cost us 20 tickets. And as I mentioned, on a normal server, I don't really care about those 20 tickets. We'll make them up in our next moves that we're going to be making as we demonstrate that we're already outmaneuvering this enemy team. But on TT, where the maps tend to become stalemates, those 20 can really matter, and you can consider that a bit of foreshadowing for the rest of this match. So right now I'm just placing a rally down so our guys can go back to that, since I don't want to risk the truck, since I don't really think the radio is going to be in bleed out anyway, since it was a little bit off to the side. I figured there's some time. But while I'm placing this rally, we look off to the left and see a couple of people. You might be able to spot them. So I pretty much have to give up this radio for dead. It's too late for anyone to get a rally spawn. Unless that blueberry makes it in time, which he doesn't. As you can see, the radio is already gone. This is a goner. This concept of losing a hab because you didn't defend it is something that weighs on the minds of new players, but it's something that I've basically forgotten about until I came back to this server. Because this server plays like scrims, and in scrims you have to defend your fobs, and in this instance this is considered a mistake. This is something that we did that'll cost the team tickets, as I've already said. Moving on. Now, as we take a look back at the map, we can see that the enemy is starting to push back into the west of Biochem, and, luckily for us, they have fully captured Biochem. That means when we take that flag, which we're more than set up to do, we're going to get a 70 ticket advantage over the enemy team. Sorry, real quick detour, real quick note, we lost a tank on the northwest side at some point. That's something I noticed in post, but something that I have not been good at noticing in game lately, because I've been out of practice and it was already quite challenging for me to keep track of armor, radio, and flag ticket counts before I took a break for like 6 months, and now I'm really struggling to manage to keep that mental count in my head. But just for reference, I did see us lose a tank on the west. Anyway, moving on to what I was saying, the enemy is coming in pretty much from directly the west, pretty much directly from their main. They're moving in what I would consider to be a very predictable way. And we do essentially have biochem double fobbed. We have that north fob, which is pretty close, that people can stage rallies off of, and we have our south city fob, which is a bit more contested because of this enemy contact that's pushing in from the south city that I, to be honest, am not entirely sure where is coming from, probably residual rallies off of that hab. But either way, we have a reasonable enough hold on it that I feel like we are at least going to full cap it. I feel like that's a pretty safe bet at this moment. So what I'm doing now is preparing for offense. This is what we talk about with outmaneuvering. We have gained favorable positions in pretty much everywhere in the middle due to the fobs that we've been building, and now I'd like to extend that so that when we get our full cap, we don't have to worry about a prolonged defense, we can just immediately hit the next flag in line. So while I'm driving up north, I'm just trying to look at where the next possible flags are and position myself to hit them all as efficiently as possible. And while this is happening, looking back on the defense, we still maintain absolute control of cap zone, but we start to lose our fob on the north. Now, I thought that was a pretty decent fob and a pretty decent tree line, but it stands to reason that a lot of people are pushing from the west, and it's reasonable that they made it around and, outshot our guys and are starting to get onto it. Now, this is a situation where we start to lose some control over our current objective, and it starts to look like it's becoming unsustainable. And my normal approach when that's happening is I can easily shoot for a double neutral here. If we have complete control over cap range, but we're starting to lose control over the surrounding area, if I can get control of the offense objective and neutralize that, well, then our guys are in prime position to either hold cap for long enough for us to full cap, or if they lose it, at least get back into cap range and stealth cap it. That requires less map control, and they don't necessarily need to have complete control over the region. They just need to play a little bit smart. And we still have people over there as well who are in our squad who we can directly communicate with to attempt to stealth cap it. So I'm going to go for the higher risk strategy here and attempt to neutralize the next flag in line. The alternative here would just be going back and trying to regain map control over our defense, but I'm pretty far away from that, and normally I'll just go for the double neut if I have the option. Another two things here are happening as well. 11 appears to be on an enemy hab down to the south, and I think they end up taking it out. I'm actually going to include that in our final radio ticket score at the very end of this match, because I'm pretty sure that's what happened. I didn't really get any verbal confirmation, but it looked like that from the maps. And my guys who are over there fighting are telling me that Biochem has a very small cap range, and that in turn might make it pretty easy for these, 5, 6, 7 guys who are still there to hold it for long enough for me to get this full cap if I don't fuck up. But I do fuck up, because what I fail to realize here is that the enemy team actually was smart, and there is a full squad ahead of me on this objective. I assume not, because they were making great progress from the west and they were actually managing to overwhelm pretty much our entire team who was there. So I assumed it stood to reason that there was roughly their entire team there as well. Maybe 1 or 2 defenders here. But regardless, I go for our usual fairly high-risk strategy of just shove a radio down their throat, as I rearm my rally, but I do it kind of poorly due to being out of practice and also just, I just do it poorly, to be honest. And in the end, although I do have spawners ready and people ready to spawn here who I've talked to in command chat, it doesn't make up for the fact that I placed a very hasty, very panicked hab trying to put it in some amount of cover, but not really knowing the map, not realizing it was all these Scorpo house assets that don't fit them, but I kind of put it in the open. It's covered from the east, which is where I think the enemy hab is going to be, but the enemy hab is just south of us, and they just proceed to camp the absolute shit out of that once we all start dying. Also, the enemy has 3 fobs here. They've also triple fobbed their defense, and in the end of the day, even if this went perfectly well and we got control of cap, it wasn't going to be sustainable. There was a highly unlikely chance I actually would have been able to get my truck out, and I basically just drove a free 20 plus 5 plus however many infantry tickets into this enemy objective. I had my suspicions that the enemy team wasn't as bad as I was giving them credit for when they all started playing well micro-wise on our current defense objective, but they still weren't really maneuvering around us. They were still just placing that one hab at a time and trying to brute force it, and I still thought that I could get around them with just the simple classic go to their undefended defense point strat, and that was just not the right call. And that's not the worst of it, because we just pulled several blueberries off of defense, which was already going poorly for what is basically a 0% chance of actually getting this double neutral, which, bear in mind, at this exact moment I still don't realize, but will come to be apparent very soon as our hab starts getting camped from the enemy hab directly to the south. Now, I turn back to go help, but at the same time, we have some people coming in, a Tiger, who are going to come down this north bridge, and I'm going to go rally with them off the east side. But there is a Bradley with its engine off right next to me. The first time I hear it is when it starts lighting them up. So after that Bradley kills them, we lose our chance at an external rally. Basically, the only thing I can do is go back and actually try to win this FOB fight. Meanwhile, on the east, we have some friendlies who are actually pushing that enemy FOB that was marked to the west of our defense objective, which is important, but it also means that our control on cap range is slipping as the enemy rotates to the north where they took out our other FOB. Ignore my trash aim here, I just readjusted my sensitivity when reinstalling the game, and yeah, it's pretty embarrassing. Don't worry about that. Now, while we were doing all of this, another squad, I believe it was Squad 7, comes up from the south with a Logi boat and builds a secondary offensive FOB. And this is actually a good one. It's far enough away that you can stage rallies off of it. It's a bit less exposed. And at some point, another HAB, which was a mortar HAB, was marked to the west, thus confirming to our team that this location here is at least double fobbed. And while these people push up from the south, they are going to realize that it is in fact triple fobbed, since they also have a fob down to the southeast in that tree line southeast of the attack objective. So it's going to get kind of interesting here, but essentially I think Squad 7 is basically going to save us from having a complete ticket fuck up here, because they are going to branch out and kill these other two fobs, as well as attempt to kill the southern fob on the objective itself. This is a bit in the future, I'm talking a bit ahead of what's going on now. But ultimately, they are going to do their best to actually make this ticket neutral. So although we lost our central fob here, they take out two other fobs, nearly take out the third fob, and then lose their fob. So we are completely even on radios on offense. We just have to worry about our KD that we may have lost here. And with that said, I'm going to jump well ahead to when all of this is actually happening, and the south fob you can see is created. We've taken out the other two enemy south fobs, and I'm making a last-ditch effort to hold a neutral that we somehow managed to pull off here, just by focusing some infantry into cap range. Unfortunately, focusing this infantry into cap range also meant that we were unable to really go focus on proxying that west fob, and in the end of the day, this isn't going to go so well. Now, similarly, in this double neutral situation, the commander decides to drop Artie on research after the enemy team neutralized that. And you can see not too much has changed out there. The enemy still controls the west, and we still have our one remaining centralized fob there. But they decide to drop some Artie to attempt to clear it, which can be a good move, it can be a bad move, it really depends on a double neutral. But in the end, they're actually going to get quite a few kills with that artillery, since it's a largely open flag, and that actually is going to start to matter. You can really cut this entire match into pre-offense here and post-offense, where in the beginning it was looking like we were going to roll multiple flags and have a pretty extreme advantage, and after the fact we're lucky to get out just going neutral on radios, and we're basically shoved back to our defense objective with only the one flag that we've managed to take from the enemy, which is now in a double neutral and doesn't look like it's going to resolve in our favor. So this entire match really is looking kind of shitty. It's looking like it might come down to a classic TT stalemate, each team has 4 flags, who did the best on tickets kind of match. And that's not what you want to hear after I went around and went and lost a radio on the east side in the beginning, lost another radio on offense, and the north radio, which people were actually staging off of, and I will defend, also went down. Technically, we are responsible for minus 60 tickets. There's obviously a lot more nuance to that, and I would attribute a lot of our success on the mid in our early game to the 3 radios that we created with one of the only 2 Logi trucks. But technically, we are down 60 in that regard, if you don't include the enemy radios that we've also taken. Now at this point, I've obviously given our double neutral up for dead, and I am only looking at research and our actual defense objective, our flag 4, and how that's going to work out. Our friendly helicopter, who once again has spotted pretty much every single enemy HAB as it's been placed, knows that they are currently setting up a HAB on the west end of research with a helicopter. And I'm kind of torn, because part of me feels like I should go defensive on our flag 4 and try to double fob again, but the only real location to do that is that same shitty building that we were just at, and we might just be able to work and stage rallies off of that and play in a more TT playstyle. So part of me is tempted to build a better offense objective instead, as you can see, offense fob, as you can see by my move mark that I just placed there, purely because people are having to cross that river and we're in kind of a shitty position to be able to try to contest research. I'm also kind of operating under the assumption that if they build that internal fob, they're pretty much going to be going straight east directly into the flag, and nobody's going to have time to actually break north into that tree line. And if we replace that fob there earlier, it was a decent fob, and I feel like we might have a better chance of once again recapturing research. Now, this is sketchy because I am relying on us actually keeping our 50 ticket objective research by either postponing it or recapturing it, and I'm risking another 20 ticket asset to do that, when instead I could theoretically assume that they are going to take it and start playing more of a ticket conserved playstyle and try to essentially win a stalemate style game instead through microplay. Looking back, in hindsight, I think I would have gone defensive immediately and just tried to build a secondary fob to secure our objective that we absolutely cannot afford to lose, and then relied on the fact that we've gone almost ticket neutral on radios, and we still could theoretically make up that difference on the south, since at this point in time we still haven't lost our south radio. But ultimately, I don't think I make the correct decision, but I make the decision to go and double research, and we will see how that goes. And it ended up being kind of the right play, I want to say, because we lose our center city fob, which I think was long overdue, to be honest. I didn't place that in a great location. I didn't place either of our early city fobs in a good location because I eyeballed the map on a map that I've never played before and saw two locations that I thought would be good, and they ended up being not necessarily great buildings, and I basically already radio blocked myself. But that one in the middle was particularly bad, and I'm surprised it lasted that long, and it really starts to go down. And it looks like it's going down because people are spawning to its south, whether that be rally or radio, I don't know. And we actually do pretty well on cap range by purely focusing on it, but ultimately we would have just been wiped at that point. There were a couple rallies up, but most of our team couldn't spawn unless they spawned way to the southeast, unless I built this one. So it allows us to put more pressure onto research and really attempt to hold that cap, but the enemy team is just getting better and better positions on our actual defense objective right now, which is our fourth flag, and it's looking like it's probably going to go double nuke. So I make a risky call here. And as I've said with risky calls, when we're getting to this close to being a stalemate kind of match, it's really hard to justify them. But the enemy team builds a fob directly to the east of our defense objective and are working on double neutraling it. And you can see the two perfectly accurate marks, both the radio and the hab. So what I probably should have done here is just plunked down a rally and went out after the radio, maybe driven a bit closer to the radio. But I try to throw one stone and kill two birds here by placing a fob here, which we can then use to actually get back to the defense point, because we're not going to be able to use our north one for that. The idea being that hopefully some people can stage off of this and maybe try to prevent a double neutral when they're unlikely to be able to do that from other positions. What I fail to consider is that our south fob that Command set up in the beginning kind of already works for this purpose. It's pretty much undetected, and really people could have just used that instead. I didn't really need to risk 20 tickets to get two angles of approach here, especially if all we ended up needing was a stealth cap during a double neutral situation. And the other thing I fail to consider is just, we're on TT. These guys have already demonstrated to me that they're an average TT team on the other side, meaning that they can find our fobs and they can take care of them. And this one is going to go down in absolutely record speed. I have my friendlies spawn on it to go after that radio so we can take care of their spawn, and it ends up just being a classic spawn trade. We do get their radio as they get ours, but they saw it, they heard the truck drive up, their fob's right there. I was relying on a level of blindness that you just don't get on this server, and it was a dumb mistake for me to go in there all half-cocked and act like I could just shove a fob down their throat with 3 spawners and not have that be a mistake. But it does at least serve its purpose of getting the enemy radio. We could have gone ticket positive if I just used a rally instead, but we do end up taking care of that, and we trade radios on the east side. And now we just have to worry about whether or not we're actually going to go fully double neutral here, or if we're going to get research station back and get our ticket increase that we probably need to win this match at this point, since we've been wasting so many tickets in other places. I should mention that when we place this east radio over here that immediately gets proxied, this is when public perception of us on the team starts going downhill for obvious reasons. People are noticing we're placing radios, they're noticing the radios are being destroyed, and they're not happy with us because they all recognize it's going to be a close ticket game. And I can't blame them. I'm making mistakes here. But I'm kind of suffering from a bit of the sunk cost fallacy here. I'm recognizing that over the course of this match, from all the radios I counted, I believe our team is down 40 tickets on radios, 2 radios. We actually have taken a lot for those we have lost. And I'm thinking that we're just not going to win this match if we don't take back research and get the plus 50. I've seen armor get destroyed on our team. I haven't heard or seen any of their armor get destroyed. KD, I couldn't really tell you because I haven't been so close to the action, but I know that both teams have been fishbowled. I really feel like we need research. So I am going to go with one last hurrah here, and this is going to get me a lot of flack from the friendly team. But while our friendlies are pushing the fuck out of that West FOB on research and attempting to proxy it, I'm going to make one last ditch effort to shove a FOB down its throat to the point where 9 people can just spawn in, move 10 meters, and have a consistent, constant proxy on that Western FOB. However, I was thinking so hard, trying to recoup ticket counts in my head and trying to figure out whether this was worth it, and just not being situationally aware. And I was not considering that infantry actually was breaking out to our south out of other FOBs or potentially out of that Western FOB. And this was a pretty hot radio. Now I looked at the tickets and I thought we have about 70 tickets. I don't even think there's time for them to really break out and fully kill this FOB before the match is actually over. So I didn't really feel like this was that much of a risk since there wasn't even that much time for the match to develop for this FOB to really become under attack if the enemy team learned about it. But as you can see, I look south there because Sniffles calls contact south and immediately gets shot in the head. And this FOB just ends up being another embarrassing repeat of the one that we just set up to the east. Hopefully you can see why I've chosen to showcase this match. I've pretty much gotten over this approach on this server of just shoving FOBs down throats. But this is my match where I allowed myself to relapse with some false sense of security with the performance of the enemy team on the previous match, as well as their inability to get to mids early on and the fact that we started this match by feeling like we were outmaneuvering them. Now they've demonstrated that when they had time on their own defense objective, they also made a good, smart FOB network and prevented us from being able to quickly take flags. And they've demonstrated that when we let up on the defense and our entire team wasn't focusing on being defensive, they got in and they capitalized and they built some more spawns and they're starting to really fight for map control and they're doing just as well, if not better, than our team. And I really should have had a reality check there and I should have split my attention and kind of realized that I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, but I didn't. And although this doesn't actually go too poorly since we do manage to fight these few people off and get this hab up, the commander makes short work of that by artillerying it immediately.
12. He's not out of that field. Or is it? Apparently it's not out of that field. Oh, shit. That's not a single man. It looks like it's further than that. But yeah.
We got that radio fully dead, right? Now, because I got revived and there's no medic, I'm basically just trying to run back to the truck and survive this artillery barrage, and then my plan is just to remove the radio the moment the hab is fully deleted and try to outpace any enemies who might come to delete it themselves, so that we can preserve the tickets. And that's what I'm trying to tell the team right now as penance for my mistake here, as they all kind of turn against me for this blunder. But ultimately, I need to run pretty far away from this artillery in case it's a creeping barrage. I'm a one-shot from anything even remotely close to me. And then we do have a rally up, so we do have some other people who might potentially be able to help us remove our radio in the event that they are dead and able to spawn. But it's going to be a race against the clock. We're now down to 30 tickets. This is a 20-ticket radio. This asset that I didn't think was going to come into play before the match would drain itself of tickets is coming into play before the match drains itself of tickets. And it wasn't even that helpful because the few people who spawned on it just got either killed by artillery or had to stay there and focus on defending it from the south people, and they didn't even get a chance to go actually effectively proxy that hab to the east. So in the end of the day, we're not going to take a research station back. So not only did we not get our plus 50 that I was gambling for, but our gamble didn't pay off in the worst way possible, and we're about to lose another 20 tickets. So yeah, this match has not gone well and we have not contributed positively to it. Let's just see if we can at least dig this radio down and prevent that from happening as I try to shoot people with no stamina.
You were playing this whole game.
Are we digging these down?
Are we losing?
We're removing this radio here. Okay,
We're losing because we had all these flags and they took them back from us. So
We're losing because we put down 5 halves and we've lost them all. That's 100 tickets.
Yeah, that's true.
Cat, pull the ammo in the truck.
Spamming halves doesn't work anymore.
Isn't it like 10 seconds a half? Or radio?
So here I make the mistake of loading the 100 into the truck. I thought I had it a second, but the moment I turn, Sniffles gets shot, and then I can't really fight in my current state. So we end up losing complete control over the radio.
Alright, well, first up is that they have fewer.
Hold it. Oh, rip. That's. There's only like 5 or so. 5 or me. Why would they be west? 5 or 9. Okay.
Yeah,
Holding northern apartments. Really not very many infantry there.
We just
Why did I
access
stop
radios.
it? I don't know.
Would make concern.
End the game.
Oh my god,
Why did we even
that
put
was
it
the
out there?
wrong
Like,
decision.
it's so far away from an active objective that already has 2 habs for. It's not worth it.
I don't really get how we're
Not really surprised by the results of this game.
Yeah, boys.
Yo,
Balance.
And there you have it. The match ends just seconds before we lost our radio, and we somehow win. I guess I was technically right. The tickets did run out before the radio came into play, but not in the way I was expecting, and way fucking closer than I was hoping for. So as you can hear, the team wasn't necessarily happy with us, and as I said, totally understandable. We basically threw away that final radio. That was a really bad placement. But in the end of the day, the other radio that we threw away that was an objectively bad placement, we at least went to get ticket neutral on, and pretty much all of the other ones, they served a purpose outside of the offense one, which was just shitty. So yes, we did lose 2 shitty radios, and we did trade a couple others that we didn't need to if we used rallies, but there was a bit of hyperbole when he was saying that we cost the team 100 tickets. I went back and watched it through, and as best I can tell, our entire team was down 2 radios for that duration of that match, and both of them obviously being radios that we were responsible for, and so we did directly lose the team 40 tickets, which was nearly enough to change the course of the match. Don't get me wrong, we made mistakes. But in fairness, we were also the only squad outside of command at the very beginning, placing fobs in the middle of the map, and several of those fobs did prevent entire team wipes when everybody's rallies were stomped, so you can blame us for the losses, but the fobs needed to go down regardless. I think we played the back half of this game absolutely terribly, and I think I should have recognized from a much earlier point that I actually was going to have to give the enemy team credit and start playing much more conservatively with assets. But the beginning was alright, and I really just wanted to showcase this match because it shows the mistakes I made early on this server very often, and how I learned that you can't get away with just spamming shit out in the open here because the enemy team will react quickly and effectively to that happening. Pretty much exclusively on this server as far as the servers I've played. Hopefully going forward I can show you more TT approaches to the actual server, and I can show you playing for micro and playing for tickets and playing more conservatively with risks in terms of radios in the future, because we've had some excellent games, especially team-wide coordinated defense-only ticket sinking style strategies that'll be much better to show competence than this match where we basically fucked it up for our team. But we'll see. We'll see how often I feel like playing, and we'll see how long I actually keep playing Squad 4 this time around. But anyway, thank you for watching Cap nearly throw a TT match, and I will maybe see you in the next one, depending.